Hey guys, we had the XLK technology sector, so Jared, Willie, and I decided to do Salesforce. So Salesforce is a cloud-based customer relationship manager or CRM software, and it was founded about 20 years ago with the goal to help companies run more efficiently. So moving on to the sector overview, they are included in the enterprise software industry, and this has an expected growth rate of 7.4% over the next 4 years until about 2025. So they do have this industry is expected to grow quite a lot. Moving on to Willie.
Yeah, so they have an ESG score of 10.9, which equals low risk. And that low risk comes with the conservation, which we'll see on the next slide. Is Salesforce achieved net zero greenhouse gas emissions in 2017, along with some other efforts. And this is led by their people and relations with Mark Benioff as chairman and CEO. And we'll see their complete executive team right here. And we'll see the board of directors with a notable member being Colin Powell, who's a former U.S. Secretary of State, which I thought was interesting. And then we'll see the complete board of directors right here with Mark Benioff. Like I said, he's chairman and CEO. And so, with any proxy issues that they want to have shares reserved for issuance, just regular issuance, and then issuance under their employee stock purchase plan. And there's also a stockholder proposal regarding the right to act by written consent. And moving on to their Christian faith and how it ties in, they have a company called Faith Force. And Faith Force is the interfaith employee resource group at Salesforce, focused on celebrating, supporting, and fostering understanding of our global faith and spiritual diversity through inclusion in educational events and initiatives. So I'll pass it on back to Bryson.
Moving on to their SWOT analysis, starting right off with their strengths, they are actually one of the top 5 within their cloud service industry, and Forbes actually awarded them the Innovator of the Decade, so they do have quite a bit of strengths. Moving on to their weaknesses, there is a large expense with marketing sales, just trying to stay number one within the industry. It caused their marketing expenses to actually double from 2014 to 2018 to $4.8 billion. But moving on to their opportunities, they have a lot of room for international growth. So they do already have a foothold in the European and Asia Pacific regions. So if they focus on expanding these operations, they will have a great opportunity for growing more. Moving on to their threats, competition with Microsoft and Amazon and IBM, these are their biggest threat, and it has led to an increase in the cost of marketing and research and development, just trying to stay ahead of their top competitors. Moving on to their Porter's Five Forces, the existing rivalry is pretty intense just because each company is trying to drive down competitive prices so that they can gain a greater market lead. So you can see some of their top 3 competitors down below. But moving on to the threat of entrance, this is pretty low because there is a large expense just with the cost of research and development. It causes the entrance to be weaker, and the large licensing requirements also is a big threat. So moving on to the substitutes, it is relatively lower just due to Salesforce being service oriented. So they're not just pushing out their products to customers, they are trying to kind of create that community and foster that. So moving on to the buyer power. Product differentiation is very high within the CRM industry, and this leads to fewer products offered by different firms. So this causes weaker buyer power. And then lastly, in the 5 forces is supplier power, which is also low because there are very many different suppliers that have the raw materials that Salesforce needs. So they can decrease their supplier power by building relationships with multiple suppliers and having a very efficient supply chain. Moving on to the economic model, cloud computing is forecasted to grow 19% until the year of 2024. So there's a lot of room for growth within the cloud computing industry. Then moving on to the correlation matrix, as you can see, the beta is for Salesforce is 1.13, which correlates very closely to the market. So that is very good. Then moving on, I'm going to hand it over to Jared.
All right, so taking a look at the sales forecasts, we can kind of see a trend of they've continued to grow every year over the past 10 years, at least about 25%. And just we see a steady growth right there on that chart. And then the arithmetic average has been 29.68%, which looking over at our income statement forecast, that's what we use to forecast next year. And then so currently current year's growth is 17 million. Um, and then looking at cost of goods sold, percentage of that is about 24%. So that's what we use to forecast. And then over the past few years, their tax rate has changed quite a bit. They've had some years where they have not had profits, causing them not to pay any taxes. But we just kind of took an average and landed at 37% for their tax rate.
And so when it comes to their multiple models, we're expecting an increase in price to sales of 950, increase in price to free cash flow of 44.21. When it comes to price to equity, 2020 was a bit of an outlier with price to equity of 1,266. So we're choosing to ignore that for right now. But when it comes to a price to equity, it gives us a price of $772, which is a little bit out there. So like I said, we're just going to ignore that for now, but it gives us a current price based on our valuations of 199.50 and 198.95. And so when we compare that to Oracle, our price to sales with Oracle on the next slide is 485, and then their price to free cash flow of 1599. This is Salesforce has a higher price to sales and a higher price to free cash flow. Like I said, for right now, we're going to choose to ignore the price to equity. And when we go on to SAP, we see the same thing with price to sales 5.98 and price to free cash flow of 37.23. Salesforce has a higher in both those categories. But with Oracle and SAP, they're currently at their valuations, it's currently overvalued. And so here's the discount cash flow model. Salesforce does not issue a dividend. Oracle and SAP do issue dividends, but for the sake of comparisons, we're not going to include it in this slide. So we're going to focus on the free cash flow with their constant free cash flow having a negative price. This is due to them having a lot of long-term debt and a high WACC. I'm going to pass it on back to Jared for the investment risk.
All right, taking a look at their investment risk, Salesforce is not a company that's used by kind of your typical consumer or customer. This is mainly for big businesses to keep track of their clientele. Mainly used by sales companies. This is not a very well known stock, but for our sector, it's in the top 10 stocks. So for XLK, and it's a leader in CRM tools as well. The U.S. government actually uses Salesforce to kind of keep a cohesive way of tracking local state government information, everything like that. And Salesforce has stayed fairly steady the past few months at a high price, which looking at it can be risky to buy in at such a high price as well.
And so with our investment summary, they're currently overvalued, and they reached an all-time high in August of 2020. And like Jared said in the previous slide, they've stayed steady at that overvalued price. We gave them a fair market valuation of around 200, and the current stock price is 241.24, and that's as of Thursday at 4 p.m. They have a 52-week range of 115.29 to 284.50. We recommend not buying the stock as of right now. It is a good company, but with their current overvalued stock price, we don't recommend buying. Thank you all so much for listening. On the next slide, we'll see our references. And thank you.